My name is Sara Piskor. I'm the Director for Strategy, Policy and Communication of ENTSOG, European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas. And you may wonder why a gas person is joining HyPSTER project presentation, but our role is, let's say, in general, to make sure that the gas grids are utilized to its utmost to facilitate the nascent hydrogen markets development and providing the good basis, the good transmission connection for hydrogen economy to grow. Therefore, I'm very often invited to similar meetings in order to explain how the gas TSOs are contributing with their assets, with their expertise, and with their thinking about our common futures, about the hydrogen utilization of the assets. And my role for today, for this meeting, is to explain to you what ENTSOG is exactly doing for this. So first of all, I would like to maybe say two words what kind of activities ENTSOG is mandated to undertake in order to bring us closer to hydrogen economy. First of all, our core task is, of course, make sure that the planning of the gas grids is compatible with the EU framework. And for this, we are preparing every 2 years the 10-year network development plan based on the so-called 10E Trans-European Energy Network Regulation. As you know, this framework was established to develop the European electricity and gas grids. Now it has been revised, and since this year, we are working already in the framework of this renewed 10E regulation, which calls upon ENTSOG to prepare hydrogen grids planning. And the TYNDP, so this 10-year network development plan for 2022, would be a hydrogen TYNDP, and it will include only hydrogen projects. Therefore, we are in constant dialogue, and we facilitate the development of the whole value chain on the hydrogen side, because we as the midstreamers have the contact with both the production and the consumption part of the value chain. We need to understand the supply and demand for hydrogen in order to be able to concretely and with good data, good input, contribute to the planning process. Therefore, we also work with multiple stakeholders in order to understand where we are on the projects on hydrogen side. We believe in ENTSOG that the proper energy system integrations will happen via hydrogen and via hydrogen properly localized electrolyzers, but also transmission and storage infrastructure, so that the European so-called hydrogen backbone will be able to facilitate the development of hydrogen where it is needed in secure and liquid manner, so that the characteristics of the gas market that we value the most, so the security of the sources from multiple directions, and also ability to buy hydrogen in a liquid market, is something that is available and achievable for the future hydrogen users. Therefore, we are working on repurposing and retrofitting of the hydrogen of the gas infrastructure to hydrogen usage. And we believe that this is the quickest and the most economic solution to develop such a grid that is needed for hydrogen. Currently, we are also working with different actors on the hydrogen mapping. The last map in the previous slide was showing the development of the hydrogen, thank you very much, the development of the hydrogen grids, which is a vision, but also we are documenting with all the TSOs, but also DSOs, how local, how, let's say, global we can see this, this market to develop, and also how the clusters of hydrogen could be interlinked between each other, so that there is the liquidity and system security ensured to those clusters. Now, on the next slide, you can see the very basic dependency between hydrogen, between electricity and gas systems. You can see that, let's say, today gas to power will be replaced with future power to gas dependency, but also that for both electricity and gas network, it does make sense to commonly plan the siting and sizing of the electrolyzers and siting and sizing the long-term storage. Hydrogen is perceived on electricity side to a certain extent as a competition, I must say, but it's also growingly entering into the debate as a part of stabilization of the intermittent renewables, and also as the one and only or the best, most economic solutions for hydrogen long-term energy storage. Therefore, we are working together with our partner ENTSOG on electricity side in order to prepare hydrogen role in TYNDP, this 10-year network development plan scenarios, in an interlinked manner, so that the sizes and places in the grids where the electrolyzers are located and planned and built are supporting also function of the electricity grid. On the next slide, I would like to conclude with certain important elements that are right now on the table and in this being discussed in the Brussels bubble, because I'm coming maybe from this more regulatory part of project. You are gathering different types of expertise. So let me share you maybe those observations based on this dialogue that we are having at the EU level with those demand and supply side stakeholders. First conclusion that we draw from our multiple engagements is that we need to be engaged along the whole value chain together, and we are creating this value chain indeed from the beginning. It's a nascent market, and in order to de-risk the hydrogen economy progress, we need to have the full value chain de-risking process. That's also what brings us together between the operators of storage, of transmission corridors, but also the terminals, to this conclusion that we are here hand in hand having this dialogue with potential importing parties, potential users of these assets. And we need to coordinate time-wise and also effort-wise and risk-wise. How do we approach our projects, and how can we ensure that this common voice is heard well at the regulatory and also decision-making and financing levels. The robust regulatory framework is something that is necessary. Right now, as you are aware, there is hydrogen and gas package being discussed between the co-legislators, and we believe that the clear signals are needed from this package. We need investment certainty, we need clear signals how hydrogen could flow in Europe, what's the definition of the clean hydrogen, how much the green, how much the blue hydrogen could play its role, and this is best to be achieved in the most open framework and building on the best features of the third energy package. As I said, this liquidity, this open access, this transparency, and the synergies between electricity and gas systems. Using those synergies and efficiency is third element here. We believe that the system is the most efficient and effective when it is integrated, and where we have this common discussion about retrofitting the existing infrastructure and locating hydrogen production and storage facilities in a way that support electricity system, and that the backbone for hydrogen builds on synergies between existing gas grids and electricity grids. And last but not least, we see today how important it is to be secure on any market, and how security of supply needs to be inbuilt in this energy transition. We believe that the times when hydrogen will be developing its contribution to the economy, the long-term policy would need to make sure that security of supply is designed from the beginning. that we do not rely only on point-to-point connections, that we do not have only one project in our focus or one cluster in our focus. Of course, it will be the first focus to kickstart. However, we need to think already now that those clusters are well interconnected, and therefore they provide for sustainable, secure, and affordable hydrogen for the future. And that was my last message. I hope you found it useful, and I'm ready to take any questions you may have. ENTSOG is, of course, at your disposal in case of any info, contact, or part of expertise could be helpful for your project. I wish you all the success and ready to take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sara. Now we're going to switch to the first roundtables. And the topics is contribution from industrial, financial, institutional actors for the development of hydrogen infrastructures project in Europe. And I will have with me 3 other speakers. So I'm going to call Amir SHARIFI from I24. He is Chief Investment Officer for and also Senior Managing Director for Ardian. Susannah FERRIS from National Grid UK. She is a hydrogen market strategy lead. And Astrid HARTWIJK from CORRE Energy. She is Chief Development Officer. So thanks a lot. Please sit down. You will have to share the micro. And to start, I'm going to ask you to introduce briefly your company. So we're going to start with you, Mr. SHARIFI. If you can introduce us, Ardian, and what do you bring for hydrogen market?
So Ardian is Europe's largest fund manager for private equity investments with $140 billion under management. As you can see from the next slide, we have expertise in infrastructure that was built since 2005, in which we have invested in the past 15 years in the whole value chain of infrastructure, from production of renewable infrastructures, but also midstream assets across Europe and Americas. Recently, and that's the and that was the next. And then if you go to the next slide, recently we have moved into defining an energy transition strategy, a very comprehensive one that was under my leadership, and that has helped us to define that we have become already a big player in the renewable field with a 7.5 gigawatt of installed capacity, but also we need to explore other areas of the energy transition, including batteries and charging of vehicles and hydrogen. And so if you move to the last slide of this presentation, short presentation, we are actually having a very strong focus on hydrogen. On the one side, we have created a dedicated hydrogen infrastructure fund that will close in October at a size of 2 billion, which is being sponsored by a number of industrial groups, but also by financial institutions. It's the first of its kind and the biggest in the world. And the second initiative is that we are working together with all Ardian infrastructure portfolio companies to see how we can help them to convert or to adapt to the hydrogen economy coming forward.
Thank you. So now we're gonna follow up with the National Grid UK. So Susannah.
Thank you very much. I'm Suki FERRIS. Lovely to be here today. I work for National Grid Gas Transmission, which is the owner and operator of the UK's high-pressure gas national transmission system in the UK. As asset owner, we're responsible for maintaining the safety and integrity of our network, which is around 7,660 kilometres of pipeline, 24 compressor stations, about 500 above-ground installations. We have very large power stations connected to our network, very large industrial and commercial sites. And in addition, we're connected to 8 regional lower pressure tier distribution networks. Just to give a bit more of a context about the sort of gas landscape in the UK, through our network we transport between 800 and 900 terawatt hours of energy a year. Gas is used for heat in 85% of UK homes, equating to about 22 million customers. And then just a final point on the introduction, we're also the operator of the network, so we are responsible for the day-to-day operation of the network, ensuring enough supply meets demand, and we're also responsible for the long-term planning of the system, which includes the potential for hydrogen pipelines, which I'll go into more detail later on in the session.
Thanks a lot. Astrid, I let you introduce CORRE Energy.
Yeah, so I work for CORRE Energy, and for those of you who don't know CORRE Energy, we're a relatively new company, founded in 2017. Currently, we call ourselves a scale-up, but we have big ambitions. We listed on Euronext Growth last year. And what we do actually is we do long-duration energy storage, but we do that in the form of compressed air energy storage. So really, this is electricity storage. It is quite different from the application of batteries in terms that it is it's high power generation. We, for instance, our plants, they can generate up to 320 megawatts, and it is also much longer duration. So we're able to generate that 320 megawatts for about 3.5 days. And basically, yeah. So how that works? Maybe you can go back to the previous slide. So sort of the model for case really is, I think, with more renewables coming into the grid into the future. This morning already the gentleman touched upon it. We're going to see more ups and downs of electricity supply. And in order to balance that, this is where long duration energy storage comes in. Basically what we do is we compress air at times of high renewable generation and therefore mostly low prices. And we release electricity back into the system at times of low supply of electricity generation. So I think how does it then compare to hydrogen is also that we're able to actually put power back into the system at times where there is very little renewable generation. And then, so how does it really work? That is this slide. So I think it has definitely a lot of similarities with hydrogen storage and electrolysis in that we help reduce curtailment. Obviously, we use power at times of too much supply, but also because of the speed that our plants can react, we provide flexibility and balancing services to the grid. We can really come in and provide all these ancillary services that are currently mostly being supplied by, in most places in Europe, thermal power plants. And therefore also when you talk about the future where we're completely going off fossil fuels, these thermal power plants are going to disappear, and there's going to be also a need to still have flexible generation capabilities to provide power, and this is where large-scale energy storage can come in. And then maybe last not but least, the last slide, I will not go in detail yet because I think it will come up in the discussion. You may still wonder, okay, why am I here? And that is because actually I think what we aspire to do is to combine different types of storages. So in one of our projects in Denmark, we actually combine hydrogen storage with electricity storage in the form of case, with electrolysis and renewable generation. And that really sort of integrates, it provides the full value chain for, well, actually both electricity and hydrogen there. And therefore, that is also where system integration comes in, what the lady Sara just before has actually talked about.
Thank you. So, Ms. FERRIS, what work are you doing to gather the evidence to develop hydrogen infrastructure project in the UK? And what are the ambitions of your hydrogen infrastructure project today?
Yeah, absolutely. So National Grid Gas Transmission is involved in a number of hydrogen network projects under a program of work called Hydrogen in the NTS, or HINTS. There are two flagship projects that I would like to share with you today. The first one is a project called Future Grid. So this is a £10 million network innovation competition funded project where we are building an offline miniature gas national transmission system network to test hydrogen at 2%, 5%, 20%, and 100%. And the aim is to demonstrate our network is safe to transport up to 100% hydrogen. And the important thing to say about Future Grid is that we are building this facility using decommissioned assets. So pieces from our network, including pipes, bends, flanges, regulators, etc. And the aim of using decommissioned assets is because our network is between 30 to 50 years old, so we need to demonstrate that our existing network is safe to transport hydrogen and can be repurposed, and that's why we're building this demonstrative test facility. The outputs from this facility, which should demonstrate and validate our assumptions and work so far that our network is safe to transport hydrogen, will feed into the development of our safety case to be able to transport up to 100% hydrogen, with our ultimate ambition being fulfilled by a second flagship project called Project Union. So Project Union is our project to repurpose up to a quarter of our network, 2,000 kilometers of pipeline to transport 100% hydrogen. We aim to begin this program in 2026 and complete it by the early 2030s. The location of the pipeline routing we envisage to be connecting strategic centers of hydrogen supply and hydrogen demand, which will likely be in the initial industrial cluster locations. So that is in the northeast, the very top of Scotland, the northwest, the very top of Wales, in Merseyside, the southeast from Teesside to Humberside, the southeast, the very bottom of England in the Isle of Grain and Southampton, and then finally the southwest in Wales. So the ambition is to develop a resilient network to connect these disparate locations of hydrogen supply and demand to each other, to facilitate the creation of a hydrogen market for the UK, to enable fair access for market participants, to ultimately lower the cost of hydrogen production, with the ultimate ambition to connect into Europe through the potential development of a pipeline from Bacton into Europe to connect into the European hydrogen backbone to facilitate cross-border trade.
Thank you. Astrid, you mentioned the project in Denmark, and I have seen that you've worked also on other projects in the Netherlands, for instance. Do you see differences between different challenges by countries, and for instance, are the support different from the government or even private fundings? Do you see differences to develop the hydrogen markets? Are there many incentives that we don't find in other countries and that could help also?
Yeah, so we currently have, we are active in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and in Germany. And I do see differences, and it's also related to the fact that the way the energy system is currently organized in these countries is not the same, although there are similarities. So for instance, the Netherlands is very dependent on natural gas, also for its power generation. Denmark has a lot of heat in the system. And in Germany, it's a mix of everything. So, for instance, if I look at the Netherlands, there's really big ambitions about for offshore wind, to really build that out and to completely phase out natural gas power plants, which currently provide the basis of the power generation in the Netherlands. And that is really going to result in a lot of demand and supply peaks in the system. But for instance, of course, here in France, there's a lot of nuclear in the system, which is more like a baseload supply of electricity. And I think also the reason also why we combine on this picture electricity storage in caverns with hydrogen storage in caverns and electrolysis is also in places where the hydrogen market is not developed yet. And you have the chicken and an egg problem. For instance, in Denmark, this actually provides a use case, a first use case for hydrogen, because the case plant actually uses hydrogen as a fuel. Because, well, all of you know, when you expand the gas, when you take it out of a gaffer, it will cool down and you need a fuel source to heat it up. And because the speed and the rate which we expand that gas, air in our case, it's very high. So there's a lot of cooling and we need hydrogen as a fuel to warm the air again. And in this case, that really provides the use case for both Gas Storage Denmark, who is here in the room, Sune, to start building their cavern storage, upon which they can, of course, also attract provide third-party access, but at least they know that there is a first demand for that, as well as really get electrolysis off the ground, in this case provided by a Danish company called Eurowind, because again, it provides that use case for them to build electrolysis because they know they have a customer, and from there they can scale up. So in that respect, I think our solution, it differs a little bit. That was your question about where we are, in what country, because the energy system in each country is different, and also where they see sort of their future ambitions.
Thank you. Mr. Sharifi, so you mentioned before that your Ardian support the industry to decarbonize, but how do you support them, and how do we connect the supply and demand when infrastructures are into place?
So on Ardian side, with the portfolio companies we have, they are present across the value chain of production of energy with renewable assets. Midstream, because we have some oil and also gas pipelines and storage companies in Europe and in the US, and also petrochemical storage companies, and usage, like airports, like roads, like district heating companies. So if you look at this portfolio and how can you help them to transition to a more CO2 friendly way of operating, there are different solutions. I mean, power is probably one of the obvious ones in many applications where you can use more renewable energy and you can use a cleaner source of power. But in many cases, power is not a solution, and you need to have a fluid or a gas to connect. So in the case of our renewable assets, one of the interesting part is that they could be, some of them which are merchant, could be connected with hydrogen electrolyzers. And therefore be a supplier of those, and we can use the capabilities we have built there to supply that. Then we have pipeline and storage companies in gas, in oil, in petrochemicals. Some of them have very good locations, like in Rotterdam, in Houston, in Baton Rouge, in Fos, in Italy. So all of these locations will be strategic, either when you connect them with hubs, industrial hubs of consumptions at a kind of local or regional level, but they can also be extremely relevant in the context of importing or exporting of energy under liquid or gas form. And by that I mean potentially you can see that there are many today moves around ammonia or in methanol or derivatives of hydrogen, which to some extent can be built in places, can be produced in places where you can build very large power plants without needing a connection to the grid to be attractive, because you can have a combination of wind and solar that gives you a very high load factor, and you can do that at a very large scale, including in Australia, in Chile, in the Middle East, and those places are kind of remote from the consumption places. So that goes to your second part of your question. How do we connect production and consumption? Ultimately, if it's long distance, you need a carrier that can travel in long distance. And so one of the ones that has been traveling for a long time is ammonia, but produced from a gray source, and therefore very highly CO2 emitting. And today we can see we can quite effectively and with limited amount of subsidy convert that gray to green ammonia, and having plants which are based on renewable power plants. And effectively in the portfolio of Hy24, we have invested into Hy2gen, which is a developer that has operations in Quebec, supplied by hydropower, in Norway, supplied by hydropower, and then convert hydrogen to ammonia. And the plan is to sell that to a trader that will then use it as a commodity and sell it to different users. And then that commodity will travel in different locations, and at some point in time, it will need to be stored. It could need to be stored if you're not able to have a fluid logistic chain. And that's where having storage and pipelines can be very effective. But I was very interested to hear the previous presentation about saying we need all solutions to deal with that logistics. And we can build, of course, pipelines and storage. In some cases, you don't have any other alternative. But in many cases, you can be smart and refurbish or repurpose existing infrastructure. You can use also right-of-ways and roads, which are existing. In many cases, the road is a very big part of the capex. It's almost 2/3 of the capex. So building a pipeline nearby is actually not so big of an extra cost. So with all these advantages, you can really be targeting a more efficient energy system. And I think we need to have a combination of investments into new infrastructures, but also trying to be smart about how we can refurbish and repurpose. And not only thinking about if we're traveling, if you're using gas, hydrogen as a gas, should we use a gas pipeline? Well, in fact, you could also use a pipeline that is traveling, that is currently using liquid, and also use it. I mean, it's not. That's the interesting part about hydrogen, is that it's a kind of getting you to explode many existing barriers. Barriers of liquid versus gas, barriers of power versus gas, and oil versus gas and power. Which, when you talk with at the board of a few companies, and they always think that's not my world, but it's going to have to be their world to cooperate with different worlds, in fact. And I think that's the future to which we shall all be converging, is to make create cooperation at a deep level, industrial level, and business level.
Thank you. So it's clear for everybody that cooperation is very important. Sara mentioned it also before. But are there also challenges that are very important for the future hydrogen market? And do you think that it is reachable in the near future? So this is a question addressed to all.
Thank you. There are a variety of market challenges to developing a hydrogen market. To list just a few, of course, we have supply and demand uncertainty. So the chicken and egg situation, Astrid, that you mentioned. So, for example, in the UK, we have some hydrogen targets to achieve 5 megawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2025 and 10 megawatts by 2030, half of which should be electrolytic. And we heard in earlier presentations the hydrogen targets in Repower EU doubling to 20 million tons of hydrogen. However, as we all know, the hydrogen market is still in its infancy, and a challenge to this is the need for mechanisms to unlock that investment in hydrogen production, storage and transportation projects. In the UK, to mitigate this challenge, the government is finalising business models. So we are awaiting the finalisation of low-carbon hydrogen production business models in 2023. Hydrogen transport and storage business models by 2025. But another challenge on top of this, which we face in Europe and the UK, are legislative and policy decisions on the role that hydrogen will play. So, for example, in the UK, we are awaiting decisions on the role of hydrogen blending in 2023, and the decision on hydrogen for heat in 2026. And from a transportation and indeed a storage perspective, this really adds into the challenge of strategic planning. So there's so much uncertainty on the scale of hydrogen, on where it will be located, which feeds into the ability to plan for infrastructure. So especially to make sure they have the right size of infrastructure. And we all know that infrastructure doesn't appear overnight. We cannot develop a hydrogen storage or networks overnight, so we need to have this certainty to plan for. And a final challenge that I'd just like to mention is on consumer and public acceptance of hydrogen. Hydrogen is still such a early days in terms of development that it's a barrier that I think needs further consideration especially beyond the hydrogen bubble, where all of us are obviously very engaged, but there is many more consumers that we need to be continuously engaging with on the benefits of hydrogen. So those are just a few. I'll pass to you, Astrid.
Yeah, so if I can add to that, and I truly believe in the power of cooperation and doing things together. I think actually it's an absolute must in able to succeed. Also, I think there's not just one solution that is going to provide the answer. I think the challenge for a carbon-free world is so big, we're going to need really all solutions to do this, all types of storages, all types of generation, whether this is gas or whether this is power. But I think when I coming back to cooperation, I truly believe also it has to be not just as part of a value chain and I buy your hydrogen and then you do something with it and you pass it on to your customer, but that we also really do this as in with open books. So in this particular case, if I can come back to Green Hydrogen Hub again, for instance, we are doing the full value chain with the two other parties in a public-private partnership, because Gas Storage Denmark is the TSO. We're doing the economics with open books. And actually what that helps is we can see where the bottlenecks are and the challenges, but we can also together work on actually increasing the business case. Because if we do this together, for instance, what we're finding now, there's actually possibilities, for instance, to increase the load hours of the electrolyzer, which helps their business case, by operating the case plan differently. And we would never have discovered that if we had all just done our own part and not shared the numbers. So yes, the answer is I truly believe in cooperation and to the deepest level and really being willing to share the details and also the numbers behind it.
There's not much I can add, but maybe only one point is that you mentioned about regulation. In fact, for me, regulation is important, but it's even more important that the regulation is clear and simple to implement. And there's a very good example in the US recently with the Inflation Reduction Act. The US were lagging behind because they didn't make any progress under the Trump administration. And in fact, now they have become ahead of Europe in terms of putting in place a regulation that sets a very clear target, up to $3 per kilo if you have a gap in your cost, and it works like a contract for difference scheme for 10 years with very clear guidelines and implementation criteria. I think Europe is working on similar schemes, but which are much more complex and that take a lot of time to come on board. Likewise, we need similar schemes on the demand side. I mean, we have an experience, in particular in Europe, around PPP schemes. Well, I don't see why we shouldn't have regulations which are also very stringent and supportive of setting up refueling infrastructures in the key countries. There is a regulation that has been discussed at the European level, which is the Alternative Infrastructure Fuel Regulation, the AFIR. But it's taking time. It's not very ambitious, or the ambition is being discussed. So again, if we want to solve the chicken and egg issue, one key part of the equation is to have regulators that provide a clear answer. In the meantime, I think it's a matter of getting the cooperation not only at the business level between the players which are in the industry and are strong believers in it, but it's also about investors, industrials, and the regulator working hand in hand. And I encourage also any industrial in this room to consider that it's interesting to bring on board financial investors early stage, because behind a fund you have many also different players that can provide you with capital and early stage, which itself is a kind of diversification, but also ways to educate a broader market. So there is a kind of snowball effect. At the moment you bring on, the more people you bring on board on the consortium level, maybe it makes things a bit more difficult or complex, but in fact, the kind of scale effect can become much more attractive, and the leverage that you get from that.
Thanks a lot. So my second question was what do we have to focus to accelerate the development of the sector? But you replied to the question already. Then I will ask you, what are the next steps you are taking to develop the hydrogen infrastructures in your company? What are the next steps?
Infrastructure?
Perfect. So I'll just talk a little bit about the projects that I previously introduced. So our next steps with FutureGrid, which is that offline hydrogen test facility, the groundworks are almost complete. Just to give a kind of sense of scale of the site, the site is about the size of 3 Olympic swimming pools. We have 400 meters of pipework. What we will be testing, as I mentioned, the site will be commissioned in January, and we will be testing 2%, 5%, 20% and 100% hydrogen. We actually included the workstream of 5% hydrogen due to the EU gas package. So we want to make sure that we are compatible with trade over the interconnectors. To facilitate this testing, what we're going to do is, first of all, fill this offline test facility with natural gas. And then we will vent the volume of hydrogen that we want to test. So, for example, we'll vent to 2% natural gas to inject 2% hydrogen to test that percentage through this demonstrative network. The hydrogen is going to be grey hydrogen from Air Liquide, tanked in 300 bar trucks. The testing at the site will take place over 6 months. And after that, we will be analyzing the data and hopefully validating our assumptions that our network is safe to transport up to 100% hydrogen. In terms of future phases of work at FutureGrid, next phases of work could include, for example, adding a 1 kilometer pipe to the site to test inline inspection, or we call it pigging in the UK. We also want to test deblending. So we want to have a physical trial of deblending at the site, and also an additional purification to upgrade the hydrogen for fuel cell use from being transported at 98% purity through the FutureGrid site. And finally, we also do have ambitions to test one of our compressors at the site. In this next stage of work. And it's important to say that at the FutureGrid site, we will be transporting hydrogen through this miniature network at pressures of 70 bar, going through a pressure reduction to 41 bar, and then recompressed to 70 bar in this closed loop. In terms of our next steps for Project Union, we are embarking on the pre-feasibility stage of work. So this is like a 12 work stream program looking at everything from not just the asset side, but also the operational side, standards, policies, commercial framework, regulatory framework, etc. that will be necessary for Project Union. For every feeder that being identified to be repurposed to hydrogen, we will have the pre-feed phase of work and then the feed stage of work. But like I said, it's still uncertain in terms of which pipelines to select at this point in time to be repurposed. And just to close, we aim to begin construction of Project Union by 2026.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add a few words.
Yeah, so I can add a little bit about infrastructure. Of course, we don't build infrastructure, but I think in the Netherlands we're extremely lucky that the location of our project, it's in a town called Zuidwending, which is in the far north in Groningen, and at the moment it's that site is being used as natural gas storage site, and our caverns are going to be just next door, and Gasunie is actually developing the hydrogen backbone from there. So we are extremely lucky to be located so close, and we're currently working to link into the Dutch hydrogen backbone. And then in Denmark it's the same, because our project is on the actually on Gas Storage Denmark's existing natural gas storage site. That is actually where the backbone is going to start, the hydrogen backbone. So we're there in the right place. Although we are working, well, I should say Gas Storage Denmark is working also with the DSO, Evida, to also build infrastructure to connect electrolyzers that are co-located with onshore wind and solar farms, to also be able to transport that hydrogen to the central storage site. And in Germany, it's pretty much in the startup phase, so we're also keen to still learn what is ongoing and what would be good locations to build our sites.
Thank you.
If the question is about what we're doing in terms of building new hydrogen infrastructures. Well, with the fund Hy24, it's the purpose of it, effectively. So we have made three first investments. The first one I mentioned is Hy2Gen. So this is about e-fuels production in North America and Europe in particular. The second one is with Enagas, the Spanish TSO. So they have created a subsidiary dedicated to development of hydrogen projects, green hydrogen projects. And we became co-shareholder in that entity, also to support unbundling rules and also to get them to accelerate the pace at which they can create new green hydrogen production aimed at refineries or steel-making companies or cement and maybe for export in the longer term. And the third one is the refueling station network in Germany called the H2 Mobility, which is the biggest refueling station network there, with 90 operating stations currently, and the plan is to multiply that by 3 in the next 10 years to be able to supply the local use of some buses or garbage trucks at a municipality level, but then to clear clusters at a regional level, and ultimately to be the backbone of a refueling station network across Europe when there will be long-haul heavy-duty traffic. So that is a bit the idea. But what I think is interesting in those 3 cases is that there is a very entrepreneurial spirit for all these 3 companies. And that is also one area that is interesting, is that, for instance, in the case of Enagas, they decided to create a subsidiary to do it, not only because of unbundling the rules, but also because the culture of the company of Enagas was more regulated and more stable and steady cash flows, whilst when you go into a business which is more dynamic, in fact, you need different ways of operating. Smaller teams, more reactive, and more able to take risks. And so that's interesting, I think, an element of the discussion, I think, in terms of what can unlock a faster hydrogen ecosystem scale up.
Thank you. So thanks a lot to everyone. And I don't know if there are some questions in the audience. Yeah, I'm coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for all these very interesting numbers. I ask myself regarding the bottleneck that we have, isn't there also a problem on the renewable energy side? So how much do we need on new renewable energy in Europe to build up all these demand or necessary demand tomorrow for renewable hydrogen? Can you give us a number on that?
Yeah, I think I can sort of reply from the Dutch side, because that's the market I know best, because that's where I'm based. So the renewable build-out plans for in the Netherlands for offshore, they're big. The plans are to build 20 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. But I also know actually that is not nearly enough to supply all the hydrogen required ultimately to fully decarbonize the system. So the Netherlands is definitely also looking at import of hydrogen.
Yeah, just to add to that, yeah, from a UK perspective, we're targeting 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. As I mentioned earlier, we're aiming for 5 megawatts of low carbon hydrogen production by 2025 and 10 by 2030, half of which should be electrolytic. In terms of our sort of forecasting of hydrogen demand, government analysis indicates it could be between 250 to 460 terawatt hours of hydrogen demand. But we're still at very early stages of market development, so yeah, great question.
You will find the right information in the IEA latest report, if you want the figure at a global level, at European level. What I have in mind as a figure is the figures mentioned by the EU Commission in terms of amounts of hydrogen to be produced, 10 million tons, and imported 10 million tons by 2030. In fact, to get to these numbers, you need hundreds of gigawatts of capacities to be installed, which will not be possible simply for many permitting and land and other reasons at a European level. So by definition, the production of that hydrogen of that power is probably going to be decentralized in other geographies, where you can find very attractive load factors and conditions. And there will be exceptions to the rule, of course, in places where you have, in Europe, where you have the lowest LCOE, basically, which will be the driver of it. So south of Europe and Northern Europe, south of Europe for solar, and Northern Europe will be extremely interesting. And then, of course, you have the offshore that is going to play a key role.
Thank you. Any other question? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I got a question to Mrs. HARTWIJK. Could you, well, currently we see large price differences on the electricity market, but could you comment on which price spreads you would need for the CAES technology to become profitable?
So yeah, of course we're looking for price spreads here in the electricity system, but I think there's a few other things that come into play as well, which are also, for instance, what is the cost of the alternative? And in the Netherlands, pretty much that is thermal generation through gas-fired power plants. Gas prices at the moment are not exactly low, and also in the future we're going to see higher CO2 prices. So it's a number of things that we look at going forward, modeling whether we have an attractive business case, and it's indeed how we see price spreads develop per country, as that also differs in terms of and is related to what is the renewable build out, but also we're definitely looking at what is the cost of the alternative.
Thank you. I have a question which is a little bit technical. HyPSTER project is dealing with hydrogen in its gaseous phase, but we speak about hydrogen in its liquid phase too. In terms of transport and storage, what do you think about these two technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked that, because National Grid Gas Transmission is really interested in the role of hydrogen storage. Just a bit of context in there, we know that by transporting hydrogen, the energy available in our pipes line pack, which is kind of the daily storage that we rely on to ensure supply to our end users, by transporting hydrogen, clearly we're transporting less energy. And especially with smaller networks, as we start building hydrogen networks, the importance of storage will be even more important to ensure that security of supply, a reservoir for excess supply, and to manage volatility in the network. In terms of other forms of hydrogen apart from gaseous storage, so National Grid Gas Transmission has worked on exploring the role of liquid organic hydrogen carriers, actually with Louis from Element Energy, so really great to see you here today. So we explored the role of LOHCs in terms of providing bulk storage to the UK energy market. In terms of other hydrogen projects, we're also looking at the potential to repurpose decommissioned pipelines as compressed hydrogen storage, actually, or redundant pipelines as compressed hydrogen storage. And we're also launching a project to look at the role of solid-state hydrogen storage, for example, to fuel hydrogen compressors going forward. Just to say, we know that there are a range of storage technologies, and we are very interested to learn more about them and understand the role that they can play in seasonal and fast cycle storage to support network operation.
Thanks a lot. So I just one last question, because after there will be the lunch break and we will be too late.
Yeah, my last question to you, Astrid. This picture here, where is the advantage to combine storage in compressed air and storage in hydrogen? Is it the waste heat from the electrolyzer, because it's only on a very low level?
Yeah, so the advantage of combining these type of storages is really into two things. it's combining, it's creating that first use case for both the electrolysis and the storage. But it's also in terms of being able to react to market demand. Because basically what we do here is we start with green molecules from wind or solar. We store those in terms of compressed air, so still electrons, or we convert those green electrons to hydrogen. And then on the supply side, depending on what the market needs, we can supply either green electrons or green molecules, or both at the same time. And also, I think so. That is a market-driven reason to combine it. The other one is also technical, because typically you would generate hydrogen through electrolysis when the prices are low. But we would compress air also at times when prices are low, and we would generate power and hence need hydrogen as a fuel when prices are high. But that would not be the times where you're actually creating the hydrogen. So it is also a necessity for the compressed air storage to have hydrogen storage in between. But importantly is also it's the market driven and be able to supply 24/7 basically green molecules or green electrons.
Thank you. So thanks to all the speakers for your participation.